Hare Krishna. He's bringing the book. So, yeah. So while he's bringing the books, I'll just read some prayers in glorification of Lord Advaita Acharya. And this is by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And there are 8 prayers plus an additional one. Let me surrender to Sri Advaita Acharya, who with tulsi leaves, flowers, waters from the Ganges ashore, and loud calls of love, worshipped Lord Gora and begged him to appear. Let me surrender to Sri Advaita Acharya, attracted by his loud calls, the golden Lord of Golok, Vrindavan, who is the ocean of ecstatic love, appeared in Sri Navadvip. Let me surrender to Sri Advaita Acharya, who by making the moon of Lord Chaitanya rise, flooded the world with love, with a love even Brahma and the great demigods cannot attain. Let me surrender to Srila Advaita Acharya, whose mercy is beyond understanding, and by whose request alone all-powerful Lord Chaitanya disappeared from this world. Let me surrender to Srila Advaita Acharya, who is non-different from the form of Mahavishnu, and whose parts and parcels are Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva engaged in creation, maintenance, and destruction of the worlds. Let me surrender to Srila Advaita Acharya, who is worshipped by all, who is attained only by devotional service, and who, as is heard in a certain Vedic literature, because he is Lord Shiva's shelter, has a name and glory like Lord Shiva. Let me surrender to Srila Advaita Acharya, who is flooded with love for Lord Chaitanya, and whose beloved wife Sita Devi and son Achyutananda are also filled with love. Let me surrender to Srila Advaita Acharya, whose heart is Lord Gora's eternal home, who is named Advaita because he is not different from Lord Nityananda, and who is named Acharya because he teaches devotional service. A person whose intelligence is pure and who every morning happily reads these 8 verses glorifying Lord Advaita, the husband of Sita, attains devotion for his lotus feet and becomes dear to him. So that's 8 prayers written by Srila Sarvabhauma Acharya. Yeah, just put the first verse from the chapter 6, I believe it is. Yeah. Yeah, first verse. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya 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 Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So we'll begin. This is from Adi Leela, chapter 6, and we'll begin with verse number 1 and go to verse number 12. Okay. Vande tam Sri Advaita Charyam Adbhuta Chestitam Yasya Prasada Ajopitat Sarupa Nirupayet. And that's not actually the Bengali. Let's do that different. Vande tam Sri Advaita Charyam Abhuta Chestitam Yasya Prasada Ajino Pi Tad Sarupa Nirupayet. Vande tam Srimad Advaita Charyam Abhuta Chestitam Yasya Prasada Ajano Pi Tatsarupa Nirupayet. Vande tam Srimad Advaita Charyam Abhutam Chestitam Yasya Prasada Ajnopi Tatsarupam Nirupayat. Ladies.
Vanditam Srimad Advaita Charyam Vanditam Srimad Advaita Charyam Abhuta Chestitam Yasya Prasadat Ajnopi Tatsvarupam Nirupayet Vanditam Srimad Advaita Charyam Vanditam Srimad Advaita Charyam Abhuta Chestitam Yasya Prasadat Ajnopi Tatsvarupam Nirupayet.
Anyone else? Vande, I offer my respectful obeisances tam unto him Srimat with all opulences Advaita Acharyam Sri Advaita Acharya Abhuta Chestitam, whose activities are wonderful. Yasya of whom? Prasadat, by the mercy. Agya api, even a foolish person. Sat sarupam, his characteristics. Nirupayat, may describe. Translation: I offer my respectful obeisance to Sri Advaita Acharya, whose activities are all wonderful. By his mercy, even a foolish person can describe his characteristics. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrindam. All glories to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. All glories to Lord Nityananda. All glories to Advaita Acharya, and all glories to all the devotees of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Pancha Sloki Kahila Sri Nityananda Tattvam Sloka Daya Kahi Advaita Acharya Mahatva. In 5 verses, I have described the principle of Lord Nityananda. Then in the following 2 verses, I will describe the glories of Sri Advaita Acharya. Mahavishnu Jagat Karta. Mahavishnu Jagat Karta. Maya Yaya Surjit. No. Mahavishnu Jagat Karta. Maya Yaya Srinja Ada. Tasya avatar evayam Advaita Acharya Ishvara. Lord Advaita Acharya is the incarnation of Mahavishnu, whose main function is to create the cosmic world through the actions of Maya. Advaita Acharyam Harina Dvatam Acharyam Bhakta Samsanat Bhakta Avatara Ishatam Acharyam Asraye. Because he is non-different from Hari, the Supreme Lord, he is called Advaita. And because he propagates the cult of devotion, he is called Acharya. He is the Lord and the incarnation of the Lord's devotee. Therefore, I take shelter of him. Advaita Acharya Goshani Shaksha Ishwaram Yanhara Mahima Nahe Jivera Gochara. Sri Advaita Acharya is indeed directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. His glory is beyond the conception of ordinary living beings. Mahavishnu Sritikarena Jagat Adikarya Tanha Avatara Shakshat Advaita Acharya. Mahavishnu performs all the functions for the creation of the universes. Sri Advaita Acharya is his direct incarnation. Try to remember that verses. Mahavishnu performs all the functions for the creation of the universes. Sri Advaita Acharya is his direct incarnation. So you can get the identity of Advaita Acharya. Ye Purusha Srishti Stiti Karena Mayaya Ananta Brahmananda Srishti Karena Lilaya. That Purusha creates and maintains with his external energy. He creates innumerable universes in his pastimes. Ichaya Ananta Murti Karena Prakash Eka Murti Karena Brahmande Pravesh. By his will, he manifests himself in unlimited forms, in which he enters each and every universe. Se Purushera Amsam Advaita Nahi Kichubeda Sarira Vesha Tanra Nahika Vijeda. Sri Advaita Acharya is a plenary part of that Purusha, and so is not different from him. Indeed, Sri Advaita Acharya is not separate, but is another form of that Purusha. In other words, the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sahayi Karena Tara Laihi Aya Pradana Koti Brahmanda Karena Ichaya Nirvana. He, Advaita Acharya, helps in the pastimes of the Purusha with whose material energy and by whose will he creates innumerable universes. So here's today's verse. Jagamandala Advaita Mangala Guna Dhamma Mangala Charita Sada Mangala Yaha Nama. Sri Advaita Charya is all auspicious to the world, for he is the reservoir of all auspicious attributes. His characteristics, activities, and name are always auspicious. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Sri Advaita Charya, who is an incarnation of Mahavishnu, is an acharya or teacher. All his activities and all the other activities of Vishnu are auspicious. Anyone who can view the all-auspiciousness in the pastimes of Lord Vishnu also becomes auspiciously simultaneously. Therefore, Lord Vishnu is the fountainhead of auspiciousness. Anyone who is attracted by the devotional service of Lord Vishnu can render the greatest service to the human society. Rejected persons of the material world who refuse to understand pure devotional service as the eternal function of the living entities and as the actual liberation of the living being from conditioned life become bereft of all devotional service because of their poor fund of knowledge. In the teachings of Advaita Prabhu, there is no question of fruitive activities or impersonal liberation. Bewildered by the spell of the material energy, however, persons who could not understand that Advaita Prabhu is non-different Vishnu wanted to follow him with their impersonal conceptions. The attempt of Advaita Charya to punish them is also auspicious. Lord Vishnu in his activities can bestow all good fortune directly and indirectly. Lord Vishnu in his activities can bestow all good fortune directly and indirectly. In other words, being favored by Lord Vishnu and being punished by Lord Vishnu are one and the same, because all the activities of Vishnu are absolute. Now, try to understand that. If something is different than something else, how could it be the same? But on the absolute platform, the spiritual energy doesn't have relativity, it's absolute. So what appears to be differentiation also has the same benefit. So if you get punished by the Lord, if you get blessed by the Lord, which is another form of blessing, it's good. We don't see it that way. But that's true. Because whatever the Lord does, he does for the benefit of others. He never acts for the inauspiciousness, or he never acts in such a way that people are not benefited. Even if he kills a demon, that demon gets benefit. Similarly, if he punishes a devotee, that devotee advances. Okay. According to some, Mangala was another name of Advaita Prabhu. As the causal incarnation, or Lord Vishnu's incarnation for a particular occasion, he is the supply agent or ingredient of material nature. Did you get that? Supply agent, ingredient. Material nature has many ingredients, 25 actually. So where does that supply come? It comes from Mahavishnu, and Mahavishnu, and the incarnation of Mahavishnu in this material world is Sri Advaita Acharya. So he supplies all the ingredients for what makes up the material world, and which includes all the material bodies in the material world. The 8,400,000 species are made up of the 5, gross element, the 3 subtle elements, and in the mind, and the senses, the 11 senses, and the objects of the senses. These are all of the ingredients that make up the material energy. This is all supplied by Mahavishnu, who incarnated in this pastime as Sri Advaita Acharya. However, he is not material. All his activities are spiritual. Anyone who hears about and glorifies him becomes glorified himself. For such activities free one from all kinds of misfortune. One should not invest any material contamination or impersonalism in the Vishnu form. Everyone should try to understand the real identity of Lord Vishnu, for by such knowledge one can attain the highest state of perfection. Om Gyan Timirandasya Gana Jana Sanakaya Chaksu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Shaptitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swam Padantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimakti Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavari Pastyatya Desatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhischa Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Bhavane Bhyo Vaishnave Bhyo Namaho Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krišna Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So the appearance day of one of the Panchatattvas, Panchatatvat Makam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Sarupakam Bhakta Avataram Bhakta Kyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam. So he is Bhakta Avatar. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he appears as a devotee of the Lord in order to assist the Supreme Lord in his pastimes. Or Lord Chaitanya also appears as a devotee of the Lord, but his mood is different than Sri Advaita's. Advaita is to facilitate everything that Lord Chaitanya does. And Lord Chaitanya's mood is to show the principles of pure devotional service by exhibiting the characteristics of the pure devotee in all activities he performs, and teaches by example. And the same as Sri Advaita Acharya. So on our altar, the Lord has appeared in three manifestations of himself. Lord Chaitanya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna, Lord Nityananda is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Balaram and Sri Advaita Acharya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahavishnu, who manifests himself in order to bring about the work of creation. But Sri Advaita Acharya has another combined nature, and it's mentioned here. He is also the original Shiva. There are many Shivas in different universes, but there is one Shiva called Sadashiva. Sadashiva is the spiritual Shiva who manifests himself in assisting, bringing about the creation. He is coming from Mahavishnu, and in one sense he's not different than Mahavishnu, but he is still a separate entity because he plays a particular role in bringing about the creation. What is that role? When Mahavishnu wants to create, after the interim period of annihilation and all the living entities are back into the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, when it's time for the next creation, Mahavishnu glances in the direction of the pradhan. The pradhan is the aggregate of all of the elements that make up the material energy. In that pradhan, there's no movement. It's simply what we say, everything is in a conglomerate form. There's no separation between the elements. But that glance is taken and carried by the Rama Devi, who is the consort of Mahavishnu. And in that glance there are three elements. There are the time factor, there are the living entities, us, all living entities that are in the body of Vishnu are in that glance. And there is also Lord Shiva. he is also there. That's why Shiva is also called the father of all living entities, because he helps to bring about that creation also. And then when that glance hits Pradhan is agitated, just like when the male connects with the female becomes agitated. And through that agitation, there is what we say, a transformation of energy, and through that transformation of energy, there is birth. So the living entities are injected. The same thing we see in this material world when husband and wife come together to produce a child. The male connects with the female carries the body within her, that's called her embryo. The male injects the energy, and in that energy there is the spirit soul. So that spirit soul enters the body, and then as soon as enters the womb, and as soon as it does, there is development of the body which is there lying in the womb of the mother, and then it starts to develop. It starts off with a little tiny pea. You were that big at one point? Really? There were 9 holes in your body and you were that size. That was your original size. And then you expand, and that is called growth, and then 9 months later, there you are. Yeah! Crying, and everybody saying, there he is, there she is, oh, it's my kid. But the same way happens to this material energy, because that Pradhan is it's called Devi Pat. Devi is the energy of Shiva. She is Shakti. She is in that energy. All the ingredients are there, and as soon as that energy connects with the source of its energy, then everything starts to move. And then once it moves, then Lord Brahma comes and he formulates the different bodies, taking the 8,400,000 species of life. And according to whatever particular karma you had in your previous manifestation before the annihilation came, now you're again reconnecting with activities in the material world, and then you start all over again. Because you're eternal. So this is, and then Brahma puts all the bodies together, and Vishnu arranges through his transcendental knowledge which living entity goes into which particular body according to your karma in the last manifestation. So that is, and that personality who performs that's Mahavishnu, and he incarnates as in Sri Advaita Acharya in Lord Chaitanya's pastime. So this is because it's nice to know the identity of the personalities. Although he appears to be an assistant, he is also called Bhakta Avatar. He performs the role of a devotee. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu knows who Advaita Acharya is. And therefore, in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, in association with Advaita Acharya, he would always honor Advaita Acharya and give him all respects, and even attempt to worship him. Advaita Acharya now is in the role of a devotee. He doesn't want to be honored by the Supreme Lord. He wants to honor the Supreme Lord. He wants to worship the Supreme Lord. So he is unhappy that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is worshiping him as the Supreme Lord. So he makes a plan to change Lord Chaitanya's mind. And we'll talk about that later. Right now we'll go back to that in the area of Navadvip, at that particular time, there were many persons. Jai Sri Advaita Acharya ki Jai, Sri Panchatattva ki Jai. Sri Advaita Acharya wanted to bring benedictions to the world. He, in his mood, is Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is the father of all living entity. Lord Shiva is the manifestation of complete compassion. Lord Shiva is always thinking how to benefit the conditioned souls in this material world. So in his mood as Lord Shiva, he was seeing that in Navadvip at that time, people were very materialistic. They were worshipping demigods. And their desire was to worship the demigods and to get material benedictions. But the benedictions, because it mentions that if you want material benedictions, and according to what benediction you want, you worship a particular type of demigod. For Indra, if you want powerful sex life, you worship Indra. If you want wealth, you worship the Vasus. If you want good family, you worship the Prajapatis. So the different, it's mentioned also in the Bhagavatam that the different demigods can be worshipped for material benefits. Of course, Bhagavatam, after mentioning it, says that this is not the actual goal of life. The actual goal of life is to get out of the material world and not pray for more material benedictions, which entrenches the living entity more and more in the bodily concept of life, which causes them to take birth after birth after birth. So when Sri Advaita Acharya was seeing this, and there was hardly any devotees at the time. Srivas Thakur was there. Who else was there? Was Haridas Thakur was also there at the time. And a few other devotees of Lord Chaitanya who had come before Lord Chaitanya to set the stage for his appearance. Now they were very few, and most of the city of Navadvipa was very, very interested in material advancement. It was the bastion of learning throughout the entire subcontinent of India. People would go to Navadvip to get the highest materialistic educations. They had some of the best universities there, and some of the best and most greatest scholars. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was one such scholar who lived there, and there were many, many others. Now Advaita, he's seeing these living entities, which are his children, suffering in this material world, thinking that they're enjoying. See, material life teaches you that you can be happy by arranging the material energy in such a way as to find some kind of satisfaction and happiness. Material energy teaches you that suffering is enjoyment. Haribo. That's called Maya, or illusion. When you see something that is actually meant for your defeat, but it's presented as something for your benefit, you become fooled, and you accept that as being for your benefit, and there you go for that, and that is called Maya. So Maya's whole material show is to somehow or other attract the living entities for various types of enjoyment, which simply leads to their suffering. That's all. That's all. That's material life. When you understand that, then you can understand that there's no happiness in this material world, which is being mentioned throughout the scriptures over and over and over again. Krishna says it twice in the Bhagavad Gita. Dukhalayam asastratam. This place is miserable and is temporary. Anitya asubham. He says the same thing again a little later in the Gita. But we don't get it. Somehow we still don't get it. We still believe there's some happiness somewhere. And if we just keep looking, we'll find it. Nobody's found it yet, but I'm different. Because the desire is so strong to enjoy, the idea that there is enjoyment forces one to believe there is. It's because of the desire is strong, and that causes one to believe that there is. But there is enjoyment, and there is happiness, and there's unlimited happiness, because as you mentioned, that the desire is there. That desire is natural, but it's not in material arrangements or in material activities. It's in spiritual activities. That's where the enjoyment lies. So Advaita is seeing all of these living entities who are his children suffering. Now he's thinking, what can I do? But he thought, let me just take my chakra and cut off all their heads. He became angry. When Lord Shiva, he gets angry sometimes. But he thought, no, that's not the way to do it. That was his feeling at one point. And then he decided, well, this is the work of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna himself. And it just so happened it was the time for Lord Krishna to descend in order to taste his internal mood of Srimati Radharani as the pleasure potency of his own self in the role of a devotee. So now, because of the timing and the Dvaitacharya's calling, the Lord Chaitanya appeared. But how did he call? He went to the banks of the Ganges River, the most sacred river running through the area of Navadvip. He sat down in a very lotus position, and he put a Shiva Linga there, and he was worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead with tulsi leaves and sandalwood pulp, offering it to the Shiva Linga and throwing it into the Ganga as an offering to the Supreme Lord to please come to this material world and save all of your parts and parcels. They are suffering. Now this is the compassion of the Lord. The Lord never forgets the living entities suffering in the material world. And he's always, and I use the word with emphasis, he's always trying to get us out of the suffering. Constantly, every moment. But we sometimes don't see that because we're looking for material happiness yet. Therefore we miss his mercy. So now those flowers, tulsi leaves, sandalwood pulp, there was sandalwood pulp and tulsi leaves on the flowers he was offering. They were floating downstream. Now those flowers were going to a particular bathing ghat where Sachimata, the mother of Lord Chaitanya to be, she wasn't at that time, was taking her bath every day. And she was pregnant. And every time she would be in the water, one of the flowers would hit her womb, her stomach, where the baby was. And as soon as that happened, she had a miscarriage. And that happened 8 times in a row. Therefore it mentions before Lord Chaitanya came, there were 8 girls. They were all miscarriages just before the birth of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So what was Advaitacharya? He was speeding along the advent of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But Sachimata was thinking, I'm having pregnancy and I'm losing all my children. What's happening? 8 in a row. And finally a boy was born, and that was Sarup, Vishnurup. And he was in a plenary expansion of Lord Balaram. He became the older brother of Lord Chaitanya. And then Lord Chaitanya appeared. When Lord Chaitanya appeared, actually Srila Haridas Thakur was also chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. At the place of Shantipur, he would meet with Advaitacharya, and they would both pray for the advent of Lord Chaitanya. Both of them together. So when the news came that Lord Chaitanya had actually taken birth in the house of Jagannath Mishra and Sachimata, Advaita Charya became happy, and him and Haridas Thakur had a festival. They started to dance, and they were dancing and dancing and dancing. And then Advaita's wife, Sita Devi, she actually wanted to come and visit the child and bring gifts, and so she would regularly come along with other ladies from the villages to give gifts to Mother Sachi Mata at the time of the birth of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Sita Thakurani, she is known as, Dvaita had two wives. Sita Thakurani was the main one. Advaita Charya also had children. He had 6 children. One was Achyutananda, one was Krishna Misra, and the other one was Gopal. These three were great Vaishnavas. He had 3 more. One was called Balaram, one was Jagadish, and one was Sarupa. These 3, although they were born to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they actually became impersonalists. It's interesting that the Supreme Lord, he had 6 children, 3 of them were impersonalists, and 3 of them actually became great Vaishnavas. And therefore, Sri Advaita Charya rejected those other 3, and they were called asara, useless, because they didn't follow the teachings of their father. They thought their father was an impersonalist, and they were practicing impersonalism. So it's interesting that even the Supreme Lord himself can have children who is or impersonalist. I mean, Krishna had one son called Bhaumasura, and he became a demon. Well, later he got killed, so he got purified. But yeah, so the Supreme Lord, Prahlad Maharaj was born in a family of demons, and he was a great devotee. So sometimes demons are born in families of devotees, and devotees are born in family of demons. Kali Yuga. That wouldn't happen in previous ages. That's only in Kali Yuga. Of course, Prahlad Maharaj was different. He appeared I believe in the Satya Yuga. So now the Supreme Lord had appeared, and there are many, many wonderful pastimes. As we mentioned earlier, Sri Advaita Charya was the Supreme Lord, is the Supreme Lord, and Lord Chaitanya knew that. So he would always want to find ways to honor and worship Advaita Charya. But Advaita Charya didn't want to be honored and worshipped by Lord Chaitanya. So he decided, what can I do? There's nothing that I do changes his mind. I try so many different things, and he still worships me and honors me. And this is interesting, because a devotee doesn't want to get honored and worshipped. To honor and worship a devotee is proper, but for the devotee to be honored and worshipped, they're not interested in that. But sometimes they accept it only to make other people happy. They do it as a service to others, but otherwise they are in a real devotee always wants to worship and not be worshipped. So what to do? So he decided, Lord Chaitanya, he doesn't like impersonalist philosophical teachings. So he went every night to hear from one scripture called Yoga Vashishta. This Yoga Vashishta teaches that karma and jnana is superior to bhakti. Now Lord Chaitanya came to teach that bhakti is the goal of life, and karma and jnana support bhakti. But that's their best principle, that's their best position. They can only support bhakti, But bhakti can exist without karma and gyan, but karma and gyan do help a neophyte devotee come to the stage of bhakti. That's all. That's all what karma and gyan can do. But one who attains bhakti, there's no need for karma and gyan anymore. Knowledge and renunciation. So now, he's going every night. And then Lord Chaitanya finds out, oh, what is Advaita doing? I've come to teach pure devotional service, as explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, and he is now glorifying by his activities impersonalism. So Lord Chaitanya decided, I have to teach him a lesson. Seems like when I talk, you go to sleep, and when I stop, you wake up. I guess maybe that's a good sign. Do I speak so nicely that I just put you to sleep? Okay, maybe we can just take a 5-minute break and everybody goes to sleep, and then we'll come back, and then we'll do silent meditation for a while. No, that won't work. Lord Chaitanya wouldn't like that. Neither would Advaita. So, Lord Chaitanya said to Lord Nityananda, let's go see Advaita. He's in Shantipur. So they went. So they're traveling. They're walking along the banks of the Ganga. And as they're passing, and they see a little hut. And Lord Nityananda says, who lives in that hut there? Lord Chaitanya says to Lord Nityananda, who resides in this little hut? Seems very nice. Oh, Nityananda said, oh, there's one sannyasi, he lives there. Oh, really? Let's go see him. So they go in. And the sannyasi there, he's an elderly person. They sit down, and the sannyasi welcomes them. And so Lord Chaitanya said, I guess, being with a sannyasi, he's thinking like this, I think we should ask him some questions. Because, you approach a sannyasi to get knowledge. So Lord Chaitanya says to the sannyasi, my dear revered sannyasi, what is the goal of life? Interesting. Never know what's going to happen next. So, the sannyasi says, the goal of life is to be happy. And Lord Chaitanya says, well, actually, the goal of life is to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. Sannyasi says, the goal of life is to be happy by eat, drink, and be merry. And Lord Chaitanya starts to argue with him. But then Lord Nityananda says, no, let's not argue. We just can't, we're peaceful. So Lord Nityananda says to Lord Chaitanya, ask him if he can prepare some prasadam for us. Oh, okay. So they ask him, my dear Mr. Sannyasi, can you offer us some foodstuffs? Sure. Happy to honor my guests with nice food. So he calls his wife. The sannyasi he's a grihastha sannyasi. And his wife comes out and with a plate of prasadam, supposed prasadam, anyway, foodstuffs. And Lord Chaitanya looks at it and says, well, actually, I've been fasting today, so please just give me a little fruit, that's all. No, you're my guest, you should take prasadam. And then Lord Chaitanya says, oh, okay, and Lord Nityananda, so they agree. So they begin, And then the sannyasi says, would you like some bliss? Bliss. And Lord Chaitanya says to Lord Nityananda, what does he mean by bliss? Lord Nityananda says he wants to know if you want some alcohol, some vino. Good stuff, 100%. And Lord Chaitanya looks at Lord Nityananda and says, it's time to go. So they ran out. And when they ran out, they run right to the Ganges, and with their clothes on, they dove into the Ganges because they felt we'd just been contaminated by such inauspicious association. So after some time, they dry off, and then they're on their way to Shantipur. They follow the Ganga. The Ganga leads right to Shantipur. Finally, they get to Shantipur, and then they start approaching the house of Sri Advaitacharya. Maybe some of you have been there. Have you been to the house of Sri Advaitacharya? One? Anybody? Two? Yeah. Yeah? No? Not yet? If you go every year for the Mayapur festival, right at the end of the Mayapur festival, just prior, two or 3 days before Lord Chaitanya's appearance day, there's a big festival organized by the devotees in Mayapur at Sri Advaitacharya's abode. And then the devotees come with truckloads of prasadam, halava and khichdi, and one year 60,000 people showed up, and we fed all 60,000 of them. Kavi Chandra Maharaj, he organizes this festival every year. He was the one that actually brought this festival about. And so devotees go every year to feed all the residents of Shantipur. So it's a wonderful opportunity to visit the home of Advaitacharya. There's a beautiful temple there, along with his place of residence. So the devotees go. So Lord Chaitanya arrives, and they approach the house of Advaita. And now Advaita is sitting in the courtyard, and Sita Devi's there, and also Srila Haridas Thakur is also there. And then Lord Chaitanya looks, and he's looking at Advaita, and he's really looking. He is, and his eyes are getting like red, bright red. And he just runs full speed to Advaita, jumps on Advaita and starts beating him. And Sita starts freaking out. Oh my God, my Lord, what are you going to do? He's an old man. You're going to kill him. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't hear anything. He just kept beating him. And Advaita was thinking, he's finally accepting me as his servant. This is wonderful. And Haridas Thakur was laughing. So finally, Lord Chaitanya realized, what am I doing? Why am I beating Advaita? And he stopped. And he turns to Advaita and he says, Advaita, you know I've come to teach pure devotional service in the form of the glorification of the holy name of Krishna. And you're illustrating and supporting this yoga vashishta, which is simply karma and gyan, it's impersonalism. And Lord Advaitacharya said, my dear Lord, thank you for accepting me as your servant. So he made that arrangement just to get to the position of being seen as subordinate to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because Lord Chaitanya was worshipping Advaita as the Supreme Lord, the devotees were also following Lord Chaitanya. And that was becoming difficult for Advaita. So, in order to illustrate his heart, he did a little trick. One time, Lord Chaitanya received a note from one of his messengers. In the note, it had two lines. It says, Sri Advaita Acharya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he owes 300 rupees to the king of Jagannath Puri. That was the note. And the note was brought by the assistant of Jagannath, of Dvaita, called Kamala Vishvashu. Lord Chaitanya read that note and he became very upset. He said, "What is this? The Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as a debtor. He has a debt. How can the Supreme Personality of Godhead have a debt in the material world?" He became angry. And he chastised Kamala Vishvasu. "You are saying that Sri Advaita Acharya is the Supreme Lord, but you're also calling him an ordinary debtor. You are a fool. Not only a fool, you are an offensive fool." And so Kamala Vishvasu lost all the mercy. Then Lord Advaita, when he found out, he said, "Please don't punish my servant. He's just an ignorant fool." That's all. And so Lord Chaitanya eventually forgave him. But that was an important point, that the Supreme Lord, although he plays the role in the material world, and sometimes he performs activities in the material world, none of his activities are material. And if there's some apparent connection with the material energy, it's simply transcendental. It has nothing to do with anything material. Okay, let me see some of the other wonderful pastimes of Sri Advaita Acharya. Sri Advaita Acharya took shelter of Madhavendra Puri. Madhavendra Puri is the Param Guru of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And by his appearance, the whole process of pure devotional service appeared in that area of the world. Madhavendra Puri is a very intimate and very highly developed personality in the spiritual world. He is a kalpa vriksha tree. In the spiritual world, there are trees that you go, and you can go into that, up to that tree and say, "My dear tree, I want this," and the tree will give you whatever you ask for. Prabhupada uses the example, in this world, if you go to a lemon tree and you ask for mangoes, you get lemons. In other words, whatever the tree is made for, it supplies in this world. But in the spiritual world, the trees give you whatever you ask for. So if you go to a lemon tree in the spiritual world and ask for a mango, you get nice mangoes. So that personality who incarnated in this material world as Madhavendra Puri, his eternal relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world is these kalpa-vriksha trees. So he came to introduce pure devotional service and to bring about the advent of Lord Chaitanya. Advaita Acharya was 125 years old when he left the planet. Lord Chaitanya was 52 years old when Lord Chaitanya took birth in this world. So he was quite old. And before then, he had taken shelter of Madhavendra Puri. He met Madhavendra Puri, and he took initiation from Madhavendra Puri. And therefore, the godbrother of, and this is also a very interesting point, the godbrother of Advaita Acharya was Ishwara Puri, who was the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya. So Advaita Acharya and Ishwara Puri were godbrothers, and therefore another reason why Lord Chaitanya treated Advaita, because he was on the level of his spiritual master. He was on the level of the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya, and therefore Lord Chaitanya also saw Advaita as being equal to his spiritual master, Ishwar Puri, because they were god brothers, both disciples of Madhavendra Puri. So it's interesting. Srila Prabhupada, in his early days, performed one particular drama in Navadvip in his early days. This was before he even met his spiritual master. And in that drama, he played the role of Advaitacharya. And when people were watching our Srila Prabhupada perform the activities of Advaitacharya in this dramatic performance, they were crying. Crying, saying, out of such, that Prabhupada was performing so much, because Advaitacharya is the person who brought Lord Chaitanya to this world. Lord Chaitanya came because he was requested by Advaitacharya to come, and that's mentioned in the Shastras. Srila Prabhupada brought Lord Chaitanya to the world. So in that role of Advaitacharya, when he was a young man, he was actually preparing for his role. Later on in life, he would bring Lord Chaitanya to the entire world by bringing the Krishna consciousness movement to the entire world. So when the people were watching this dramatic performance, they were crying, because Prabhupada played the part so well that people were actually feeling the presence of Advaitacharya by Srila Prabhupada's performance. Yeah. One time, Sri Advaitacharya, knowing that Lord Chaitanya was the Supreme, and Lord Chaitanya never wanted to be known as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He wanted to be known as a devotee of the Lord, and be understood in that way. The reason why Lord Chaitanya never performed the activities externally, he did once in the house of Srivas, and that was the Mahaprakash Leela. Other than that one pastime, he was always in the mood of being the Supreme, not the Supreme Lord, but a devotee of the Supreme Lord. But Advaitacharya knew, I want to worship him as the Supreme Lord. So one time all the devotees were together, and Advaita came and said, let's have kirtan. But today we won't be chanting Hare Krishna, we're going to be chanting Gauranga. Gauranga. We're going to be chanting Gauranga. 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 What's the matter? You all sleeping? Come on. Gauranga. 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 Hey! Gauranga. Simply by chanting Gauranga, you get the mercy of Gauranga. It's very auspicious. Even somebody here tried to get in. That was Sri Devi. She's trying to get into the class. Thank you, Sri Devi. Yeah, Gauranga. So all the devotees were thinking, oh my God, if Lord Chaitanya hears we're chanting Gauranga, he's not going to be happy. But Advaita was so forceful. So the devotees finally followed Advaita, and they start chanting Gauranga, Gauranga, Gauranga. And they were having kirtan chanting Gauranga. We do that sometimes. And then Lord Chaitanya was away, but then from a distance he could hear the kirtan, and so he started getting closer. He said, oh, they're having kirtan. Let me go. So he starts getting closer and closer and closer, and then he starts listening. What are they chanting? They're not chanting Krishna's name. What? It gets close. Oh no. So he looks and he sees the devotees, and then as soon as Advaita sees Lord Chaitanya coming, and all the devotees were there, all the devotees started to stop chanting. But Lord Advaita said, no, chant more, chant more, chant more. And he was really like, so the devotees were following Advaita, and Lord Chaitanya just turned around and left. And then he went back to his place, closed the door, and went to sleep. After some time, Srivas Thakur came, and he came to see Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya came out. And then immediately, the first thing he said to Srivasa, why are the devotees chanting that name? Why don't they chant Krishna's name? So Srivasa went. Held his hand up, and he was putting it in the direction of the sun. It was during the day. So Lord Chaitanya said, what are you doing? I'm covering the sun with my hand. You can't do that. It's not possible. Yes, you're right, my Lord. And at the same time, you can't hide from us. You can't hide from us. And Lord Chaitanya was silent. He didn't say anything. He acknowledged, yeah. So that was Advaitacharya. Advaitacharya always wanted to glorify Lord Chaitanya like that. Well, one time when Lord Chaitanya was traveling, this is when he took sannyas. So he decided, let me go to Vrindavan. But Lord Nityananda tricked him and brought him to Shantipur instead. And he took him to the Ganga, and Lord Chaitanya, he was in ecstasy, so he didn't know really where he was. And Lord Nityananda said, this is Jamuna. We're in Vrindavan. And Lord Chaitanya said, wow. So he started bathing in the Ganga to get the mercy of the Ganga. And Haribo Anantaji.
Gauranga.
Gauranga. Gauranga. Gauranga. Gauranga. Gauranga. I was just reading last night that if you chant Gauranga, you get a lot of mercy. I was just reading, yeah. So, Lord Chaitanya is bathing in the Ganges. And then Advaita, it's in the area of Advaita's house, but Lord Chaitanya thinks he's in Vrindavan. Advaita comes in a boat with some dry clothes for Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya looks and says, Advaita, you're here in Vrindavan. Advaita said, no, this is not Vrindavan, this is Shantipur. But actually, wherever you are, my dear Lord, it's Vrindavan. And then Lord Chaitanya realized he wasn't in Vrindavan. He was in Shantipur, and he got angry at Lord Nityananda for tricking him. Advaita said, come on, I have prepared some nice foodstuffs for you. Please come to my home, and I'll have some dry clothes. So Lord Chaitanya got in the boat, and he took him to the home of Lord Nityananda. And Lord Advaita had cooked this huge feast for Lord Chaitanya. And then, because this was a plot by Lord Nityananda and Advaita to get Lord Chaitanya to come to the house of Advaita. So Lord Chaitanya is there, and he said, give me some vyajana, which means just some simple vegetable. He spoke in Bengali. And Advaita said, no, I've cooked you this wonderful feast. Please, just honor a little bit. So Lord Chaitanya is looking at it and thinking, I just took sannyas, and this is not for sannyasis, this is for, for people who want to enjoy their senses. So he didn't say, then Lord Nityananda spoke up and said, Advaita, I've been fasting for 3 days and I've come to your home for prasadam, and look, there's nothing to eat. It looks like I have to fast again. And Lord Advaita said, you are just a reject Paramahansa. And Lord Nityananda picked up some rice that was in the bowl and he threw it on the floor. And the grains, some of the grains bounced and stuck to the leg of Advaita, and he started to dance. Getting hit with the thrown rice of Lord Nityananda, he was dancing in ecstasy. So they were having their special little exchange. So there was an argument going on between them. Now it says that when two great personalities argue, if you take the side of any one of them, you're finished. Because you never know what's going on in that argument. It may just be a mock argument, or it may be something you can't even understand. So when great personalities disagree, stay out of it. And so that's mentioned in that particular pastime. So Lord Nityananda and Sri Advaita were arguing, and they were calling each other names.